We had woken up early today. It was time for our family to set off on a long drive towards the southern city of Bristol in England. We lived in a small village bordering North and West Yorkshire, so a drive to Bristol, around 200 miles away, wouldn't be pleasant. As the journey finally began, after many failed attempts of filling the car due to my mom's hastiness, I sat there staring into the distance, pondering over the way my life had gone so far. I was only 16 at the time, but I felt as if I knew everything. I felt the lows and the highs in life since during the start of the pandemic and the first lockdown. I suffered from severe depression and loneliness, which later led on to countless accounts of alcohol and drug abuse. So, as you can tell, I had experienced several so-called inhuman encounters, but I had since quit them at this point and was around 2.5 months clean, and I was feeling much better. As the car rumbled on, the more I thought about the amount of girls I'd messed up chances with, and cursing how many mistakes I'd made over the course of the past year. I was never confident with what to say or do, and easily got attached to people I cared about a lot. But I was starting to learn the more and more I grew. As I kept reminiscing over my forsaken past, I suddenly developed a powerful wave of drowsiness, and I instantly blacked out. I woke up in the hotel. My family stood around me with mixed look of both worry and relief on their faces. What happened? I stuttered. You're awake. The loud but oxymoronically soothing voice of my mother rippled through my ear, causing me to jump in shock. It's been 8 hours. We thought you were asleep, but you wouldn't wake no matter what we tried. To this day, I'm still unaware of how I was out for that long, but at that point, I was still far too tired and hungry to care. We decided to eat out since it gave us a chance to discuss the events that had occurred earlier. However, we never came across it. Instead, my mom surprised us all by telling us she had brought tickets to the theater late. I was never really that interested in acting, so as she spoke, I wasn't exactly overjoyed, but it did give us something different to do for the rest of the night. Little did I know what was the one decision I should have never made. The time moved slower than I hoped. We ordered our meal and each enjoyed our choice, but I was still immensely sapped to take notice to detail. My mind was still perplexed about how sleeping for hours on end could result in my eyes barely being able to stay open. In spite of that, I found it much easier to concentrate on what my family was saying and how much they were looking forward to the theater later. We were going to see Wuthering Heights, a novel by Emily Bronte, brought to life in the form of acting. My excitement for literature had deteriorated a long time ago. If I was told 5 or 6 years ago, my exhilaration would most likely be considerably larger than it was at that moment. Eventually, we had all finished our meals and were primed to leave. Only the bill to pay, and we'd be on our way to the theater. Inconveniently, Mom was desperate for the toilet, so that left us in a hurry to arrive on time. I clumsily lodged my AirPods in my ear, and we embarked on the short expedition across the city. I quite enjoyed the walk there, as I was able to block out all the noise and indulge myself into music. My music taste had evolved rapidly over the past 6 months, since before it consisted mainly of modern sad songs or rap, whereas now I preferred older rock bands from the 80s or 90s. So, walking through the streets of Bristol, I was happily immersing myself into the tenderness of Radiohead's music. As fake plastic trees permitted my eyes, we were finally in view of the theater. It was huge, colorful lights dancing along the face of the entrance. The place looked much more appealing than I would have expected. As we approached, the noise grew louder and louder. General chattering was becoming inevitable to avoid, and we started queuing. The line was long, but thankfully it was moving forward rapidly, so we ended up at our seats in very little time. The seats were on the top balcony, which left me in slight discomfort due to my dark thoughts of jumping off. But there was soon nothing to deal with since the play began to start. I enjoyed the storyline to begin with, but my interest was deprived in no time at all, and my zoning out was commencing. As the play progressed, I had little to no concentration left, and my confusion was at an all-time high. Then suddenly one line caught my attention. "If all else perish, and he remained, I should still continue to be, and if all else remains, and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger." These words rippled my ears and caused my body to shiver all over. I could relate to them all too much. My brain magnified these words and lodged them deep in my memory. Over the next few minutes, I interrogated myself about my life and how much had broken down. All of a sudden, another set of words diverted my attention. The theater had enhanced in darkness to a much greater extent, but I was in excessive awe at what was occurring on the stage. A pale bright light was radiating on the center of the stage, obtruding an anonymous figure wearing full glistening white with one exception of a red glove. As I examined closer, I could shockingly observe that it wasn't red naturally. It was stained with blood. I let out a gasp of horror, and it was when I realized I was completely alone. The only living entities in the room were that thing that appeared human, but quite clearly had an abnormal aroma about it, and I. Frantically, I analyzed the surroundings in hope of seeing another panic-stricken person. However, it was far too dark to see anything. An abrupt noise caught me off guard and induced me to turn around with pure paranoia and fear. My heart was in my throat. A loud bang came about directly in front of me, leading me to jump out of my skin in uncontaminated distress. The object landed approximately 2 feet ahead of me. I warily felt around the unilluminated ground and found what I could only presume to be a torch. Fumbling about, attempting to discover the location of the on switch, I finally could see. By this point, the figure on stage had been watching me with its pitch-black, beady dots I could at best guess were eyes. The creature had a wicked grin, which from each corner of its unnatural misshapen head. The feet of it seemed to be tapping to some inaudible beat. Even so, its face was devilishly still. It was impossible to make out any form of emotion. "What are you?" I screamed out of refined fear. The creature just stood there tapping its feet, grin gaining length swifter as time surpassed. It then abruptly burst into a sea of laughter, crackling increasingly as if it had nothing else to do. Quivering behind my seat, I was frozen to the spot, too petrified to act at all. At that moment the creature was silent and just pointed towards me, but not at me, slightly above me. I hesitantly shone my torch overhead of where I was sitting, and there it was, the most terrifying sight I could have imagined seeing. It was my mom, hanging there, eyes lifeless as if they were fake. I stared into those deep pools of nothingness, unable to process what was happening. An ear-piercing scream echoed through the theater and down on the stage. It was empty. Quickly looking down from my mother's corpse, in fright, I noticed the deserted stage and breathed a sigh of relief. Adrenaline rushing through my blood. Looking back upwards, there was nothing there. I was one and truly alone now. Sitting in the darkness, I cowered. My brain was trying to compute what had just happened. Questions flooded my mind. What the hell was that? Where has everyone gone? Is Mom really dead? During my panic pondering, I was interrupted by my subtle but easily noticeable noise. Knock, knock, knock. My head studied the darkness, my torch blasting in the direction I heard the noise. It was no use, I could not see a thing. Knock, knock, knock. I gradually heard the noise increasing in volume, my whole body convulsing in unease, my instinct telling me to stay put, my mind encouraging me it was the only way out. So reluctantly, I rose from behind a chair and unwillingly sneaked towards the noise. Knock, knock, knock. As I advanced closer to the noise, I was at an utmost feeling of dread. Knock, knock, knock. It was coming from precisely beyond the other side of the door we had all entered through, the noise almost deafening at this point. Knock, knock, knock. I placed my shaking hand on the doorknob, defiantly, about turning. Nevertheless, degrading all feelings telling me not to, I turned it. The room wasn't anything as how I entered. It was like a dungeon from an old castle. The wall, a dank cobblestone riddled with unidentifiable liquid and cobweb, wherever the eye can see, only lit up by a single wooden torch, the flame crackling in the darkness. Instantaneously the door slammed behind me, generating a powerful wind removing the only natural light source. I had no choice but to move through the passageway, still sweatily clutching the torch handle. I soldered on as long as the passage would take me. In due course I ended up at an old wooden door covered completely in splinters and incapable of budging. I pushed as hard as I could for as long as my body could withstand, but it was no use. The door was stuck. Sitting down in an angry rage, I cursed everything I could think of. Tears running down my cheek by that point, the fear had completely departed and had transferred into sadness and surrender. In one last hope, I groped a nearby rock and hurled it at the door with all my might. As luck would have it, the door started to creak and slowly but surely collapse under the force of the rock. I lay back in shock as soon as the door revealed what was behind it. The creature was back, its cunning grin wider than ever at this point, standing there licking its lips, revealing a singular tooth sharper than any kitchen knife. It let out that horrifying crackle once again. "Why are you doing this?" I spluttered. The creature carried on crackling, then suddenly stopped and beckoned for me to come over. Adversely, I obeyed. I had nothing to lose at this point. The creature eagerly pointed to a book on a surprisingly clean stand, the bookcase in glass as if it had been preserved just for me. I removed the glass as the creature stood staring with its beady eyes. I picked up the book and commenced reading.
"Welcome, human,"
it opened with.
"Consider yourself lucky. Everyone else is at a slight disadvantage to read this."
I looked at the creature confusing as it smugly pointed to the ceiling. As I looked up, I let out a reverberating scream. Thousands of those same lifeless eyes, as I'd seen earlier, stared me right back in the eyes. Dropping the book in horror, the creature crackled deafeningly, slowly advancing towards the door. My eyes glued to the thousands of poor souls taken that night. when on the spur of the moment a loud bang erupted through the room. The door was shut. The creature had gone. All left is me, this book, and the blood to write my story with.